Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. This time we're going to check out the latest version of the Pop! OS Linux distro. This was released on December the 11th, 2025 and is particularly exciting as it includes a brand new desktop environment called COSMIC. So let's go and take a closer look. Right, here we are on the website for System 76 who publish Pop! OS. However, as well as providing this free Linux distro, System 76 are also a manufacturer of Linux computers and keyboards. As we can see if we scroll down, these include Linux laptops, desktops and workstations. And so, along with the likes of Apple, System 76 are one of the few companies who can sell you a desktop or laptop computer with their own operating system on it. Below, we can access more information on their brand new COSMIC desktop, which we'll look at in detail later in the video. So, for now, let's click first on Pop! OS, and we'll go straight, I think, to download, where, as we can see, Pop! OS 2404 long-term support, or LTS, is available. As the name implies, this is based on Ubuntu 2404, which was released in April 2024. Pop! OS 2404 could therefore be seen as being a bit late to the party, as the next long-term support Ubuntu release, 2604, will arrive in April 2026. However, Pop! OS 2404 still has support until April 2029. And its release has been held back for a very good reason, which is the inclusion of its brand new COSMIC desktop environment. System 76 have also said that future Pop! OS releases will now align with the Ubuntu LTS release timing, coming along just a few weeks later. And so Pop! OS 2604 should be with us in May 2026. However, before then, let's download Pop! OS 2404. And if we scroll down, we'll find there are 4 possible ISO files available for either x86 or ARM with or without NVIDIA graphics. So, for example, right down at the bottom, we could download an ISO for an ARM system with NVIDIA graphics, such as the System 76 Thelio Astra. And as an aside, this amazing ARM system has a 128-core Ampere Altra CPU, half a terabyte of RAM, 40 terabytes of storage, and an NVIDIA RTX Pro 6000 Blackwell GPU. But enough of our drooling, as we're going to be installing Pop! OS 2404 on one of my x86 test PCs. And so we want one of the 2 top ISO files, but which one? Well, as we can see, the first download is for a system with either Intel or AMD graphics or a 10 series or older NVIDIA GPU, for which an open source driver will be installed. Meanwhile, the second ISO is for a system with a newer NVIDIA GPU, for which a proprietary NVIDIA driver will be installed. Now, I had been planning to test Pop! OS 2404 on my i5-10400 test rig, which has an NVIDIA GT 1030 graphics card, and on which Ubuntu 2404, Linux Mint 22 and Zorin OS 18 all install the right proprietary NVIDIA driver. But Pop! OS 2404 does not provide a direct install NVIDIA proprietary driver option for those of us still using the GT 1030 or indeed a GTX 1050 or GTX 1060. And so I'm going to download the first ISO file and we'll test Pop! OS 2404 on my Ryzen 5 600G with its onboard AMD graphics. However, we'll return to the issue of Pop! OS and support for NVIDIA graphics cards later in the video. So let's download the ISO. Here we go, all set up. We'll just click on Save. And as the download progresses, we'll use the magic of filmmaking to speed on through. There we go. And here in Windows, I've got Balena Etcher ready to write it to a USB drive, which ideally should be at least 8 GB in size. So let's select the ISO file and start the flashing process. There we go, and do note that everything on the USB drive will be deleted. So if we quickly accelerate time, there we are, we now have a Pop! OS 2404 live USB drive. Greetings! We're now booting from our USB drive so we can install Pop! OS 2404, so I'll press enter to continue here to try and install Pop! OS, and if you need help getting your computer to boot from a USB drive, I'll leave some information about this in the video description. It's also worth noting that before you install Pop! OS 2404, you must turn off Secure Boot in your BIOS, and again I'll leave some information about how to do this in the video description. But for now, let's speed on through. And here we are arriving in Pop! OS 2404 running from our USB drive. And as we can see, the installer has already run up, so we will follow it through. So I'll select my language as English, and then also select United Kingdom, followed by English UK for my keyboard, with the default keyboard layout. Next, we've got the choice of either a custom advanced or a clean install, and here I'll go for the straightforward clean install. After which we need to select our drive. Here is the SSD on this test system, so we will select that and click on Erase and Install. And just to note, this will delete everything from this particular drive. Next, we need to set up a user account. After which we have 3 options for drive encryption. And the default is to encrypt the disk using the same password as the user account. However, it's also possible to uncheck this and to set a different password, and that would mean every time you booted the system, you'd have to log into the user account and enter a different encryption password. And then the third option here is not to encrypt the disk, which is the one I'm going to select on this test system. And let's now speed on through. There we are, that was a very efficient install, and we can now restart our device. So once again, let's speed up time. And here we are logging in to Pop! OS 2404. Where, as we can see, we get a welcome wizard. I think I'll just scale the interface a little bit, 125% perhaps might be easier to see, and we'll then click on next. We could now also set up a Wi-Fi network if we needed to. I don't need to here, I'm on an Ethernet connection, so we'll just next on that again. It seems to want us now to confirm our language. I will just again click on next. And then for some reason, it's now asking again about our keyboard layout. English UK, there we are. I'm sure we selected that previously. Well, we did select that previously. You saw it. You were my witness. Anyway, we now need to enter time zone and location. Let's type London. It's always best here in the UK. That'll do. And then now we get to personalize our appearance, where I think I'll stick with the default of Cosmic Dog. And then what is next? Well, it's the layout configuration, where there are 2 options available. I think I'll stick with what I think is the default, which is that one, but we'll look at both of them a bit later on. And we now have a choice of either floating or automatically tiling our workspaces. The thing is, we haven't seen how exactly all this works yet, have we? So I'll stick with the defaults for now, and I'm sure we'll experiment later. New keyboard shortcuts, again, I'll just stick with the defaults. And then finally, we can click on Finish. And so here we are, now running our installation of Pop! OS 2404. Right, let's now delve into the brand new COSMIC desktop environment, which is technically known as COSMIC Epoch 1, as it's the first stable release. This is Wayland native and has been written by System 76 in the Rust programming language. As we can see, by default we have a top panel with applets on the right for things like audio and network connectivity, and then on the left we have access to workspaces and applications, which, as we can see, are organised into groups with a reasonable range of things pre-installed, including LibreOffice. By default, we also have a bottom dock, which includes a search-based application launcher. We could, for example, here type Libra to access part of LibreOffice, and then we again have access to workspaces, there we are, and also again to applications, including those which are pinned to the dock as favorites. Clearly, this is all pretty similar to a GNOME desktop. And indeed, if we look back to Pop! OS 2204, it had a customized GNOME desktop, also called COSMIC, and which by default had a very similar top panel with the same kinds of applets, as well as a bottom dock with the same functionality. So, what System 76 have done with COSMIC Epoch 1 is to broadly reproduce their earlier GNOME-based desktop, but with more customization, as well as the ability to add whatever features they wish, as this is entirely their own desktop. COSMIC Epoch 1 also has its own applications, and these start with COSMIC Files down here, and I do like COSMIC Files because it defaults to a list view rather than what we could have here, which is the grid view. I do like a list view in a file manager. It just feels, well, more mature, so I very much like the way this is designed. There's also an application called COSMIC Store. This is clearly for installing software, as we can see, including, for example, Steam. If you're a gamer, you could install that here in Pop! OS 2404. Although the COSMIC applications aren't just limited to the file manager and the store. No, there are others. If we look here under applications, we can see we've got COSMIC Terminal, which is clearly a terminal. Let's just whiz up the size of the font and execute a command. What is it going to be? Let's do an lsblk, list block devices, just because it's a fun command. There we are. We can see COSMIC Terminal works absolutely fine. And we've also got the COSMIC Text Editor, which is clearly for, guess what, editing text. And then there's also two more COSMIC applications. One's over in Utilities. It is the COSMIC Screenshot application for taking screenshots, which literally here would be a COSMIC screenshot of the cosmos, so that will be very exciting. And then finally we have the COSMIC Media Player, and it's worth pointing out the first time I ran this up and selected an MP4 video, it prompted me to install additional codecs, which is an option that was noticeable by its absence in the installer. Although now, as we can see, if we do open an MP4 file, there is one down there. It will play absolutely fine, no problems at all. We've got no problems with media playback here in Pop! OS 2404. Next, because we don't often get the chance to explore a completely new desktop environment, I thought we'd take a look through the settings, which will allow us to see the range of options available. And a lot of this is truly excellent. However, before we do go through all of these settings and all the excellent stuff, I want to address what is, for me at least, the one negative in this first new COSMIC release. And this is that there are no controls here to alter the size of the interface text or the mouse pointer. Back in Pop! OS 2204 on its GNOME-based COSMIC desktop, it was possible to open settings and in accessibility to select large text and also to choose a larger pointer size. But sadly, here in COSMIC Epoch 1, there are no such controls, and I really do hope they are added in the future. And so, right now, I can only apologise for the tiny mouse pointer and interface text, which are not ideal in a video. Turning to the positive, let's run through all the settings. Network and wireless is pretty straightforward, no need to look at that. Same with Bluetooth. And we then go down to accessibility. This is where we don't have the options to change things like text size. We have got vision settings and one hearing setting down there, but basically that's what we get. But then we get to desktop, where there's lots and lots and lots of customization possible. As you would guess, we can change the wallpaper. All kinds of wallpapers are available, and there's various settings around that. But after that, it gets even more interesting. We've got this appearance setting, where we can choose between light and dark. We can alter the accent color. After that, we can also change the window background, the container background, the interface text tint, and the control component tint. There are lots of settings here. And then beneath this, under style, we can choose the level of roundedness of the corners. This is quite rounded. We can go to not rounded at all, slightly rounded, or very rounded. Those two don't actually affect the window, but they do affect the dock down at the bottom over there. We then got the ability to change the interface density. I like this. It can be more compact if you want, or we can get back to where we were somewhere up here we can go back to comfortable. I think we'll stick on that. And then down here we've got settings for the window hint size, and this refers to this line that comes around the edge of an active window. Let's just open another window so we can see the difference. There's a window with an active hint. Now it's back to this one, but we can, if you don't like that, make it smaller. As we can see like that, take it down to nothing if we want. We can of course also change the colour because it is actually the accent colour. It could be yellow. I think we'll go back to blue like that. Next down, as you might have noticed, there is an option to set the system font, the face of the interface font, but we can't here change its size, which, to me at least, is kind of peculiar. Next, we'll go back to the main desktop menu, where we've got all the options for the panel, the thing here at the top of the screen. And here we've got lots of really nice options. Not least, we can automatically hide the panel. We don't have that by default in, for example, GNOME in Ubuntu. And it means, for example, if I bring up, say, the Firefox web browser, it gets rid of the panel when it comes up, which is very handy. We could also change the position of the panel on the screen anywhere we like it. We can select what displays it comes up on if we've got multiple displays. We then got various stylistic settings. We can have a gap around the panel if we want, like that at the top of the screen. And we can also select whether or not we want the panel to extend to the edges of the screen or just in the middle, as we can see there. And then we've also got size settings. We can have the panel a bit bigger. And I like the way when it gets bigger, we move from text to icons in terms of access to applications and workspaces. Let's actually leave it on that setting, I think, like that. We could also control opacity. And perhaps most critically, we can configure the panel applets. So if we go into this, we can change everything that appears on the panel. If we don't like some of these applets being there, we can get rid of them. And we can add new ones. Not least, we can add an app tray, so we can actually have applications on the panel, the things we've currently got here on the dock, and we can show minimized windows running applications on the panel if we wish. So this offers masses of customization. Next, you're probably going to guess we've got loads of settings for the dock, the thing at the bottom of the screen. We can choose to display it or not, depending on what we want to do. Again, we can automatically hide the dock, the way we can automatically hide the panel. We can change its position. We want it on the left in a sort of Ubuntu type of way. We can do that if we wish. I think I'll put it back at the bottom though for now. We can also again change the style. We can get rid of the gap between the dock and the screen edges like that if we wish. If we do that, we can also extend the width so it looks like the panel in Pop! OS 2204 as we saw earlier. And we've also got controls of the size and the background opacity. And then again, as you will probably guess, given what we saw for the panel, we can control the applets on the dock. And again, I think this is really well implemented. It gives the user a lot of interface control. Next down, we get to displays, which does offer the ability to scale the screen. You might remember we selected 125% in the first run wizard, and we can change here to other settings in 25% increments. However, we've also got an additional scale button. So if we want 130%, we can add 5%, or we can add 10%, or 15%, or whatever it happens to be. And this does give us obviously larger text, but it gives us larger everything. What I want here is the ability to change the size just of the font and of the mouse pointer. And sadly, as we said already, we can't do that. Under sound, nothing to write home about. What you would expect is here. Same for power and battery. And under input devices, the one thing I would note, there are no options here relating to a trackpad, which could be bad news if you're using a laptop. Next, we'll move to applications, where we have the standard kind of stuff, as we do for time and language, and for system and accounts, where because we can do it, we will click on About. There we go. We can see we're running Pop! OS. We knew that. We can see our hardware specifications at the top of the screen. And then our Linux kernel, 617, the desktop environment, which is COSMIC, which, as already noted, is written to use the Wayland windowing system. Greetings! Just to demonstrate what can be achieved, I've been reconfiguring the COSMIC desktop. So, if we log in, here we go, and here we are, where I've not just changed the desktop wallpaper, I've also got rid of the dock, and I've put the panel at the bottom, and I've added to the panel the app tray so we can launch applications directly from the panel. There we are, and it also hides itself as we can see. And then to access other applications, we can click bottom left to bring them up like that. And I've also added in the minimized Windows applet, as you'll see if I do that, so we can control what's running. And we could do even more, because if we look in the store and we go down to applets, there are already various extensions, including a classic menu. So let's try installing that. I've not tried this yet, but we will have a go. And there we are in theory. We have a menu. This is really cool. I am very impressed with how configurable the COSMIC desktop is. However, there is a danger that the desktop here completely overshadows other new features in Pop! OS 24.04. So let's just mention a couple of those. Firstly, there's a new refresh feature, which allows the operating system to be reinstalled whilst keeping files, settings, and Flatpak user applications. Secondly, also new is hybrid graphics support for computers with both integrated and discrete GPUs. And this allows only those applications that require it to use for discrete GPU, so improving battery life on a laptop. However, I cannot demonstrate this here as we're currently running on a system that only has integrated graphics. As we've now seen, Pop! OS 24.04 runs perfectly on my test system with AMD graphics. And I've no reason to believe that there would be any issues on a computer with Intel graphics or a fairly modern NVIDIA card. However, I said we'd return to a system with an older NVIDIA GPU, and so here we're running Pop! OS 24.04 on my i5 test rig, which has got a GT 1030. And whilst things do work, there are some issues. For example, a few minutes ago, this system information looked like this, which is not ideal. And when the system boots for a few seconds, it looks like this, which also does not inspire confidence. I've also installed Blender, which I've got running down here with a 3D model loaded in, and if we flick to a shaded view, there are clearly some issues with the shading here. If I just resize the window like this, as we can see, rendering is not ideal. Now, for this install, I used the first Pop! OS 24.04 ISO file, the one for computers with Intel or AMD graphics or an older NVIDIA card. And if you're wondering what happens if you try the second NVIDIA ISO during boot, you get this message and cannot go any further. Now, what's happening here is that having installed from the first ISO file, we're using an open source NVIDIA driver. And as we've just seen, it's not as good as one of the older proprietary NVIDIA drivers that's compatible with our GPU. Now, if we were running Ubuntu, Linux Mint or Zorin OS, we could go into the Additional Drivers app and select the most appropriate proprietary NVIDIA driver for our GPU. However, here in Pop! OS, if we go into Applications, we look under System, and indeed under Utilities, you'll see we do not have an Additional Drivers app. And this is because any additional drivers are managed here in the COSMIC store under Installed Apps. But right now, we can't get to any additional drivers because none are installed because we're using an open source GPU driver. And so there's no graphical interface to assist us with proprietary NVIDIA driver installation. What we therefore need to do is to go to the terminal, which in my view really shouldn't be necessary to set up a GPU driver in 2025. But we'll have a go by entering this command. And to cut a long story short, after this had executed, whilst on boot we do get NVIDIA errors, we do have NVIDIA server settings under Installed Apps, as we can see here. We can open that up, that's absolutely fine. And more significantly, if we go into Blender, rendering is now okay. Although I still prefer how other distros handle drivers for older NVIDIA cards. Pop! OS 24.04 is a very nice Linux distro, with its new COSMIC desktop environment being a fantastic contribution to the Linux community. Indeed, there are already many other distros, including Fedora, with a COSMIC version available. This said, at least from my own point of view, the lack of scaling controls for the interface font and the mouse pointer is something that needs to be addressed. And it's also a shame there's no straightforward means of installing proprietary driver support for older NVIDIA GPUs. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.